A very good evening to each one of you, and thank you for making it to the public lectures that were announced for this evening. I want to apologize for the heat in this room. At least you will say that Bible Bhavan people are warm. They are not cold. We were hoping that we would fold up everything at 5 in the main hall and clear it and have the talks there because that is air conditioned. Unfortunately, this hall is not air conditioned because the government is after us to demolish it, and somehow we are holding on to it. It was 2 years ago. We are holding on to it, the demolition license for this, notice for this, and been fighting it. So we didn't air condition it. So that is the main reason. But what a delight to have you with us. I hope you enjoyed the Bible exhibit, and that it has planted some seeds in you to be able to go and learn more, read more, and follow more. The hall is still full there, so we took another decision that exhibition will go on till 8. We will not close it down, and people finish and they can come over here. We have also done something else also. These talks, these 2 lectures are being live streamed. And just in case you think somebody needs the link, Thomas Koshi at the back, who does all our communications, you can walk up to him, he will give you the link, and the link can be sent to all. All the Bible Bhavan and the DBI groups have got that already. It has already been flashed on that. So there should not be any problem with that. There are quite a few seats in the front. Keep coming. There are no reserved seats here. Only if you want to answer some questions, you could come up and sit here. You might have to then answer a few questions. That's all, but nothing is reserved. Come up and sit wherever you feel it is comfortable. We want to start on time, and there are still 2 minutes. And we have been very, very blessed with the response to the Bible exhibition and Bible exhibits. And it is probable that we might scale it up, and we'll give you more dates that it may be available in the future as well. We are talking about doing another one next year. And a scaled up version of it. Half of the team did not get their visas, so could not come. And some of the exciting exhibits that we were hoping we could have displayed, we have not been able to display those. For example, William Carey's work, and some of the first editions of the New Testaments that Carey did. How wonderful it would be to be able to actually view them, having heard about them, talked about it, now that to be available. It's 7. I will stop chattering and I will pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we are very grateful to you for this opportunity that you have given to the Christians of this city to come together in times like this and to be once again fortified in their minds and their thinkings in the written evidences that have been presented before them, and how the Word of God has been faithfully copied, published over these last 2 millennials. And Lord, we give you thanks for those who sacrificed. We give you thanks for those who went into prisons. We want to give you thanks, Lord, for those who suffered greatly. And we want to give you thanks, Lord, that it is in our hands, that we would value it, that we would read it, that we would be able to confidently talk about it to others, Lord, and that at no point we would be apologetic about the Bible. And we give you thanks, Lord, for generations of people who gave themselves to it. Thank you, Lord, for a place like Bible Bhavan that is committed to the proclamation, propagation, and the teaching of the Bible. And we give you thanks for other churches and other co-laborers right across the denominations in this city. Lord, we want to say this to you with all of our hearts once again. Lord, let your kingdom come. Lord, let your will be done. Lord, that you would send more laborers in this city and that you would use us. We give you thanks, Lord, and we bless your holy name. In Jesus' most holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
Good evening. I am Brother Shyam. I am one of the deacons of Bible Bhavan Christian Fellowship. I am today representing a small group within our church known as Engaging the Academia. We are those professors, scientists, PhDs in social sciences, pure sciences, some are in theology. Our aim is to kind of interact with those church members and outside believers who are in these places of intellectual endeavors. We want to connect with them. Today we are really happy and we thank the Lord and also our pastors who gave us this opportunity to organize these two talks. You know, these are some of the very token tasks you are given. You are really, okay, you have to do, you do it. But today I'm really thankful to our pastors and our team who gave me this opportunity to introduce our brother Rajkumar. Now it's not just introducing a speaker. What I see is the Lord's faithfulness, how the Lord uses. Throughout the Bible we see, and in our lives also we see. This brother is one of us from our own city. He was born and grew up in slums of Delhi. From there, the Lord has taken him to Hansraj College. From there, he went to Pune. He did New Testament Studies, Union Biblical Seminary, Pune. From there, he went to Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And now he's teaching at North Park University, Chicago. I think for the past 20 years, he's been a professor there. And I'm really happy to share some of the trajectories of our brother Rajkumar. He writes, the philosophy of life taught and espoused by Jesus the Messiah, as seen in the Gospels, captured my mind and imagination. He says, I realized that in this person lay the answers to the questions that plagued my mind ever since I was a child. And even after decades, Jesus continues to fascinate him and propels his work. And he is a widely published author, and some of his recent works, a biblical theology of the environment, the use of the Old Testament in the Syrian Orthodox Jacobite Marthomite traditions, human trafficking and society today. And one of his lectures is really intriguing for me. The myth of Bali Raja in intertextuality with the messianic themes of the Hebrew Bible. Lessons from the cloud of witnesses in Genesis. And at the North Park, he teaches very popular courses, poetry and wisdom literature in the Hebrew Bible, world religions, introduction to the Bible, conflict and reconciliation. Today, he is going to speak on ancient Aryans and the Bible. And today's format will be after Brother Johnson, Rajkumar's lecture, Sister Anita would come and introduce Brother Scott. Then after that, we'll open up for the Q&A. And with that, it's my pleasure to invite Brother Professor Rajkumar Boyaj Johnson. Sir, please come.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I should probably be using this mic here, right? So excited to be here. Bible Bhavan has so many memories for me. Thank you, Pastor Isaac. Bible Bhavan has a lot of memories for me. This is where I came as a young person and struggling with issues of religions, struggling with issues of philosophical questions that I had in mind. And it was a young woman who brought me into an encounter with the Lord Jesus Christ and gave my life to the Lord right here, right behind this place. There is a grassy area. There was a bench there. So I remember giving my life to the Lord, and she said to me, "What's stopping you? We're going to be having a baptism service right after this." So I got baptized that very same day. And the baptismal is right there. My goodness, you're sitting on it. Oh, there it is. Yes, right there. So this was all grass here, and right there I got baptized. And fast forward a few years after that, I found my wife, and we got married. Thank you so much. My wife and I got married right there in that hall. So before that, it was when I was thinking about, what does future hold, and what direction should I take in life after I had graduated from Hansraj College, the University of Delhi. I came and spent time with a dear man of God by the name of George Dawson to pray with him and to find out what is the future holding for me, and I committed myself to a life of ministry, and that was in front of Bible Bhavan, and that's many years ago. Bible Bhavan has so many fond memories for me. I've been teaching, as was so graciously put by our brother, at a university in Chicago called North Park University. My studies have been in ancient Near Eastern literature and languages, including languages like Ugaritic and hieroglyphics and Aramaic, and a lot of fascinating stuff to discover. The scholar who's come along with me is also someone who's studied those languages and literatures. Why do you do that? Why do you do that? We do that because we want to understand. We want to understand what was going on in society. And my lecture today is engaging with the whole idea of what was the context of the development of the Bible. What was the Bible engaging with? Who are these people's group? Why is it that we read the Genesis 3 story, for example? What is the Genesis 3 narrative all about? And I came to understand that people have used Genesis 3 in derogatory ways against women in particular. And that's because we don't understand why was Genesis 3 written? Why was Genesis 1 written? Why was Genesis 2 written? It was written in the context of a group of people who are called the Ancient Aryans. Ancient Aryans who came and took control of pretty large swathes of land in the present day area that's called Anatolia in Turkey. And I'm just coming back from Turkey, where I was teaching a class right in the caves where the people from the early church hid. And long before that, there were people there that ruled, and those were called the Hittites. And then later on came the Hurrians, and then came, much later in history, came the Romans. So there were one group of people after another, wave after waves of people called the Ancient Aryans that came. I want to bring before you the religions that the ancient Aryans practiced. And then I want to talk about how in the fault lines of that history, there is something that I call the seams of the Bible, or the fault lines of the Bible. Those seams of the Bible are generally seen in poetry. So there will be a huge section of prose. For example, Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1 could be considered to be the prologue to a prose, which says, in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. And then Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2 and onwards, all the way to verse 26, could be considered to be a prosaic form of poetry. And then it breaks out into a song. That is the seam, S-E-A-M, just like this, which engages with the crucial fault line themes that the ancient Aryans bring before society. And you find the answer there. So what is that? In Genesis chapter 1 and verse 27, it would say, and so God created human beings in his image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. There's a lot that's going on there, and all of that is engaging with the problems that ancient Aryans brought into the midst of the society at that time. And so I want us to deal with fault lines of history. I want to deal with the fault lines of history that were brought about as a result of the ancient Aryans. And then I want to deal with how does the Bible deal with those. And it is primarily seen in what I call the biblical seams, often seen in poetry. So here's a brief overview of history that I want to give before we dive into some of this stuff. From 3500 BC and all the way to 1750 BC, you read some of the seals, right? These were written in cuneiform. Thankfully, a lot of this has been discovered over a period of time, all the way from 1802 to later periods of time, and discovery is still going on, where people are trying to understand what was civilization like. And what we find out is between 3500 BC and about 1750 BC, it's generally scholars of religion, scholars of civilizations and society and history call this an ideational period. This is a period of time when human beings were okay with each other. There was no racial disparity. There was a sense of calmness in society. Take students to South Africa and go into the caves of the people's group that is called the Sana people, and you look at the pictures in the cave, it is just so soothing. There seems to be a kindness between people. There was gender equality. There was racial equality. There was no caste system. People were just nice to each other. And it was so beautiful to behold that. It still is. And you see that in the old Egyptian civilization, in the strata of different eras that archaeologists talk about. When you go to this period of time in the old Egyptian civilization, it was God. There was a God, and that God was good. He was the creator. In the old Greek civilization, which is called the Minoan civilization, again you find a sense of goodness and peacefulness. In Chinese civilization, where you go into the earliest phases of history, you find this sense of there being one God, Hao Tian, Shang Ti, and this God is a God who seeks to bring about peacefulness and people live in peace. And then you have the Indus Valley civilization. You find the same thing. There's a sense of peacefulness. There's a sense of regularity. People wanted to be clean. People wanted to be good to each other. There's a sense in which there was a realization that you shouldn't be bad to each other. Injustice was not there. We still do need to do a lot of research work, and I lead a PhD program here in India also at Schuatz University, and one of the things I want my students to do is to go into these earliest stages of history in the Indus Valley civilization, and my goodness, we still need to decipher what they said. It's been so long. Someone needs to do the research work. So Bible Bhavan, is anyone ready here? I would be willing to come alongside you and guide you, and I'm sure Dr. Caroll would want to do the same thing. It was a sense of peacefulness. But then something happened, and this is called the Bronze Age. The Bronze Age is an era where there was new technology that came into being. There was the new development of swords and all kinds of weapons, of the latest weapons of warfare, as they were called during that era. There was the new technology of the use of horses. There was the new technology of chariots and so on and so forth. And these people came from this area that's generally called the steppes. It's spelled as, I know it's really, really tiny there. It's S-T-E-P-P-E-S, the steppes, these grasslands in Europe, and they came and spread into different directions. They went into North Africa. They went into the present area that's called Palestine. They went into the present area that's called Turkey. At that time it was called Anatolia. Established a kingdom that's called the Mitanni Empire. And these people went further down south from Turkey into the land of Palestine. And they were called the Canaanites and the Philistines. So do you remember all these words? These are words that are there in the Bible. How do you understand them? It's by going and reading their literature. That's what we do as historians. We read their literature, trying to find out what are they saying about each other. There's letters that are written called the Amarna letters and so on and so forth. So you're probably a little bit ahead of me there, but that's okay. We are trying to synchronize our slides, the slides that I have here on my computer and the slides of the kind person who is leading us. So you see the Hurrians, you see the Hittites, you see the Canaanites, you see the Philistines, and all you see is a whole lot of violence. Many times these ancient Aryans would go and take over the land with violence, but at other times the people in that land will say, well, we don't have anything, come and take over. So that is just called a peaceful takeover, but it's a peaceful takeover with a lot of power that the ancient Aryans brought before them. So this is called the era from 2100 BC to 800 BC. It's generally called the idealistic invasions of the Euro-Aryans and their settlings into different parts of the then known world. The Hittites that established the Mitanni Empire, the Middle and the New Egyptian civilization. This is about the period of time, if you see it in conjunction with the Bible, this is about the period of time when the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, were taken as slaves into Egypt. And then you have the Iranian civilization that took over as a result of the ancient Aryans taking over that part of the world. In Greek, you see the same kind of a development. It's generally called the Macedonian civilization, made up of Greek city-states, and you had gods that ruled each of those cities, and they tried to overcome the gods of the other cities. If you study the Chinese civilization, you see a very similar development during the dynasties in the study of Chinese history that's called the Shang and the Zhou dynasties. And then, of course, in India, you have the demolition of the Indus Valley civilization, and various forms of Aryan control took over here. This is also the period of time when people like Moses started interacting with the invasions that were found in Egypt and found in the part of the world that's called Palestine, and we will go a little bit into that. Fast forwarding to 800 BC to around 400 BC, generally scholars of religion will call this era as an axial era. This is an era in which people's groups all over the world sought to engage with the idealistic religions of the ancient Aryans. In the space that is generally called Iran now, there was Zoroastrianism that came into being. In China, you have the teachings of Confucius, Confucianism, and Lao Tzu, called Taoism. You have the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama. You have the teachings of Mahavira and Jainism here in India. And one of the things I often say to students is, look at the nodes in which those religions of the axial era are seeking to engage with the idealistic notions of the ancient Aryans. What is the ideal? The ideal is to be Aryan. If you are a higher level Aryan, you're at the highest level. And then they had their own levels. Whereas what this era, the axial era, was saying to the earlier era, no, don't do that to us. We want to, in many senses, go against that. We want to bring about the earlier ideational era, and you'll see that in the thought that is found in Buddhism and in Jainism, and then later development of Greek religions. You'll find it in the teachings of the Reformed prophets of the Hebrew Bible that comes about between 800 and 500 BC. It is fascinating to read the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel. Each chapter they are discussing issues that the ancient Aryans bring before them and say, no, you can't be doing that. That's injustice. We got to bring about justice. And this is also the era in which the whole Hebrew scriptures were brought together. And this was the period of time when in those books of the Bible, you will find the introduction of poetry. Poetry that engages with the essential issues that the ancient Aryans brought before the people. So let me show you some pictures here that go beyond this. Yes, there are some pictures. This is, of course, an archaeological dig in one of the places in Turkey, the Mitanni Empire, and perhaps you have some of the material from here as well, Scott. Not here, but maybe next time. We also have letters that were written from one ancient Hittite empire to another, and so you have intermarriage between different kings that write letters to each other about how they have taken control of other areas of the then known world. You have places like Imar, Mari, Alalach, where a lot of documents have been recovered, a lot of written material in ancient Ugaritic and ancient cuneiform have been recovered that talk about the life of these ancient Hittite empires and so on and so forth. This is one of the examples there of a Mitanni Akkadian text, and you saw at least one of them here in the displays. There is also treaties that were made between one ancient Aryan empire and another, which is found in the Egyptian Aryan Treaty. And it's fascinating to read some of this stuff. Very fascinating to read some of this stuff and how they engaged with people who they ruled under them. There's also evidence of them taking control of society by having kids through slave women that they had of the people that lived in that particular area. Well, let's look at some of the names of the gods of these ancient Aryans called Hittites and Hurrians. There's Akneis, Anis, Aruna. This is all from Ugaritic. You see a lot of relationship between different gods. There is linguists who have done studies in Indo-Aryan languages who see the relationship between all of these ancient Aryan languages, which is now called Indo-European linguistics. Mardu, Ishtar, there is Nahiti, Ashur, Ashura, there is Aika, Sa'ata. You see a lot of relationship between different ancient Aryan languages, and I've chosen just some of those, just to give you a few examples here. Are we on this? You're on the sociology slide, which is probably the one that's just previous to this. You find a lot of mention of horses. The sacrifice of horses to the kings, to the ancient Aryan kings who were deified, who were kings, who were gods themselves. So these are the horses, and if you are truly a worshiper of the ancient Aryan gods, the kings, you are also the friends of the horses. There is mention of chariots and how chariots are made and how chariots can be used as a tool to overcome and enslave the people that dwell in those particular lands. There is mention of people who are empowered by Intar. There is people there is texts that describe the original dwellers of the lands that they conquer as people who are Timar, Timer, and so they are dark, and they're used, there's very derogatory terms that are used in these documents by the ancient Aryans to describe the original dwellers of these lands. There's also a significant amount of texts, Ugaritic texts, that talk about the prevalence of trees. There were trees, and there were divine places around the trees, and in those places there were women of the land, the dwellers of the land that were brought, and they were given a certain kind of potion that was made from the fruit of the trees. And in the process of religion, they would have a sexual encounter with these women, and that was supposed to be making them more powerful gods. So there is evidence of trees. Sha'an, who and mystical forms of sexual knowledge, if you will. Does that bring to your mind Genesis chapter 3? There is evidence of serpent gods who do all kinds of things to the original dwellers of the land. The next slide, probably. There is evidence of Amar Nu, for example, is about the people that dwelt, that took over that land, Mardu. Aton is the sun god, from which we get, of course, the name Akhenaton, that is very famous in the study of Egyptian literature. Subar to Parashua, who paid to Sargon to a certain amount of money as tribute, and then evidence of Pareset, the Philistines who gave, who were in battle with David and with Saul and with Solomon for all those years. And so when we seek to see how their literature developed, we'll be able to understand what's happening in the Davidic songs in the Psalms, for example. Ishtar is the goddess of war and sexual love. The priestess of Nineveh, Sarat Nu. And of course, the main god there was the fish god, Dagon. So for those of you who are seeking to understand what's going on in the book of Jonah, it all has to do with this goddess of Nineveh and Dagon. And that's why, of course, Jonah is swallowed up by the big fish. It's Dagon, because that's what's happening to the people there. And Jonah experiences that. And then Jonah goes and Jonah preaches that sermon, which is generally understood to be the worst evangelistic message that's ever been preached. You know, what is it? 40 days and you guys are going to be destroyed. 40 days. I mean, he just keeps saying that. One-line sermon, Pastor Isaac, you know, for 40 minutes. How about that? One-line message. But you know what it is in Hebrew? He just couldn't conceive that in 40 days there is going to be a revival. That's the word. In 40 days there's going to be a turnaround. I myself have experienced this, says Jonah. And sure enough, it happens in Nineveh. So there's a lot in the Bible that we will not understand unless we understand what is going on in the ancient Hittite, ancient Aryan texts. Baal, again, a god. A lot of this has to do with religion and sexuality that is always mixed together in the ancient Aryan texts, where there are religious rituals under this sacred fig tree, and sometimes it's called a hulupi tree, and a ritual drink of the intoxicating kind is given, which we find pretty common to all of these ancient Aryan literature, ancient Aryan religions, and as a result of that, the king, the god, is supposed to be gaining more power. I am of the opinion, I mean, I've talked about Genesis chapter 3 as well. In one of the books that I wrote during a sabbatical called Marys of the Bible, the original Me Too movement, I sought to show that that's what David was doing. When David stayed back, he went and he saw that Aryan Hittite woman. And what he was trying to do is to gain the power to be divine, and then to go and win the battle. I think we miss all that. So what is happening there is when Nathan comes to David, he says to David, David, what have you done? Didn't you hear the words of Samuel? What did Samuel say? Don't get kings like the ancient Aryans. If you have kings like the ancient Aryans, they will do to your people, to your boys, to your girls, pretty much the same thing that the ancient Aryan kings do, because they are gods. And unfortunately, the people of Israel did not listen to the voice of Samuel. And look what happened. In a dinner time that I'm just coming from, we had this discussion of a very significant part of the book of Deuteronomy. In Deuteronomy chapter 17 and in verse 18 and onwards, God says to Moses, write this down. And Moses wrote this down. He says, yes, you will have kings because you are people who are not listening to me, because you are people who want to be like the Hittite Empire and the Hurrian Empire. But even if you do that, do this at least. Every time you are going to coronate a king, that king should first write for himself a copy of the whole Torah. You saw that, right? It takes at least 1.5 years for a scribe. That king, before he is coronated, has to write for himself a copy of the whole Torah, and he has to read it every day of his life. Did they do that? No, they did not. And so I go back to my thesis statement that the Bible is interacting with ancient Aryan literature and languages. And unfortunately, the people to whom the Torah was given did not listen to the words of the Torah. And look what happened. And my prayer is that that should be a lesson to each of us in modern society. Thank you, and God bless you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Boaz, for that walk back in history. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Anita Jacob Koshi. I'm a deaconess and a member of the Engaging the Academia here in Bible Bhavan Christian Fellowship. It's my privilege and honor to welcome our second speaker for the evening, Dr. Scott Caroll. Dr. Scott specializes in ancient history and languages, manuscript studies, and the history of the biblical tradition. He has an MA from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School and a PhD from Miami University, Ohio. Early in his career and the first day of the internet, Dr. Caroll developed an internet curriculum connecting students with an excavation he co-directed in the Sahara. It was selected as one of the 5 best internet educational programs in the world and is on permanent display at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. In the 1990s, he organized and directed one of the most important private collections of Bibles and rare books in the world. The following decade, he became the founding director of the Green Collection, which formed the basis for the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. In addition, he initiated research projects on the growing Green Collection, and he was the creative force behind the exhibition Passages, which attracted over 1 million visitors, and an exhibition with the Vatican Library in St. Peter's Square in 2012. Dr. Scott had teaching or research posts at Gordon College and Gordon Conville Theological Seminary, Cornerstone University, and Baylor University. 3 times at 2 institutions, he was voted outstanding faculty person by students, faculty, and staff. Dr. Caroll directs a research project that has developed the largest database of Hebrew Torahs and related manuscripts in the world, known as the MRG, the Manuscripts Record Group. He and his wife are the co-founders of the Inspired Exhibit, an engaging traveling exhibition with more than 100 treasures that tell the compelling story of the reliable composition, transmission, translation, and preservation of the Bible. Dr. Scott has been married to his wife Denise for 45 years. They live in Grand Haven, Michigan. They have 4 adult children and 6 grandchildren. We are going to have a Q&A session following this lecture, so kindly keep your questions ready for them. It is my privilege and honor to invite Dr. Scott Caroll to the stage to speak on why the Bible can be trusted.
Well, thank you very much, Anita. It's a real pleasure to be here. We've had a wonderful time. We're so happy that so many people were able to come and be encouraged by the things that they've seen. Indeed, if we can work it out next year, by God's grace, we'll certainly in advance get the necessary visas for our partners in other countries to bring more items and to take care of those details. We've really been blessed by the hospitality of the Shaws, and we're very grateful for that. Thank you very much. It's made it extremely comfortable for us. We're happy to be here. Let me say something briefly about myself, not as if enough wasn't said, but just to help you understand why I do what I do and how I got there. I was converted in college. I was an athlete on an athletic scholarship. I come from an academic family, so a lot of PhDs and a lot of professors in history at renowned schools. I took a lot of criticism when I came to faith because it was my Christian commitment was seen to be intellectually shallow, no evidence to support it, and so forth. So I dropped my scholarship, much to the chagrin of my parents, and I went to a small Christian school, which no longer exists, but nevertheless was there at the right time with the right professors and got the right training, and I threw myself into the study of history, ancient history, and the study of languages and archaeology. I went on with my master's degree and then PhD, and worked in a PhD program where it was language intensive, archaeology. I originally went to study about something called Gnosticism, but ended up an early Christian heresy, but ended up having a very broad background that was given to me by my professors that's helped me throughout my career to approach the Bible oftentimes from a completely different perspective because of the language capabilities and knowledge and so forth. So as with Boaz, giving us a perspective on the Bible from the East, more often than not, my perspective is from the West, from Greece, which oftentimes isn't connected with certainly the Old Testament by a lot of people. Nevertheless, that's my background, and so I'm blessed to work in the areas I work in because ultimately it brings to fruition the things I felt called to do as an early believer, where I work with items hopefully to bring clarity to our understanding of the Bible and a confidence in the Bible. I think that that's a crisis. It certainly is in the U.S., that there's a complete lack of trust in the authority of the Bible. There's a lot of talk about having engagement with the Bible. That's kind of a fashionable word, but it means nothing if you're engaged with something you don't know is true. So we need to have some knowledge here. Now, there are a lot of ways to approach this. We could look at scientific evidence. We could look at prophecy. And this is done by people, all in their own niche working to show the kinds of evidences that we have. For me, now that you understand where I'm coming from, I want to look and survey some interesting archaeological discoveries. I want to look at inscriptions, which kind of tie into archaeological discoveries. Almost all of these are written things. We'll look at tablets, which were briefly mentioned by Dr. Boaz. We'll look at papyri. We'll look at some great manuscript discoveries that have taken place in the last 120 years. And then finally, some last observations about manuscript. There are all kinds of discoveries that are constantly going on. If you know something about the Dead Sea Scrolls, you may, and we had a portion of that in the exhibit, you know that that was something first discovered in 1947. Trust me, there's still unknown things, there are discoveries being made. There are the family that was the original family that got the Dead Sea Scrolls from the Bedouin. They still have a number of Dead Sea Scrolls in Zurich in a safety deposit box. I know this because I've seen it twice, representing people who are collectors. So there are all kinds of wonderful things, that's just a small example, that are out there waiting to be worked on, published, identified, and the such like. So with the slide we were just on, it's one of a very few representations of a Hebrew, an Israelite. If you go back one, and it's a very small head that was discovered, and it very likely shows the head of Ahab, the king. So if we can go back one. No, well, it's going the wrong way. Don't worry about it. That's, there it is. There are very few representations of Hebrews in the ancient world. And oftentimes they're in very derogatory circumstances. They're being run over by a chariot, they're bowing down before an Assyrian king, and so it's a very interesting issue or phenomenon. So now we can move ahead to the next one. Thank you. Next. All right, with excavations, the first thing I want you to know is this. Of all known archaeological excavations, under 5% of them have had any kind of work done on them. And of the 5%, the least represented countries, the least excavated country sites, is Israel and Egypt. So when someone says, you don't have archaeological evidence for something, I mean, that's obvious. We don't, given the statistics I just told you, that's very likely. Understand this, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because you don't have something, it's not proof that you won't have it, especially under these circumstances. It takes money to excavate. It takes time. Someone has to be specialized. It takes a team. On our excavation in the Sahara, we had over 100 common workers. How would you like to manage them in the Sahara Desert? You've got to do that. You've got to work with the Egyptian government. You've got other issues, illegal farmers that are trying to plant on your excavation. And then when it's all done, you've got to raise money to do it next year. And in the meantime, you've got to present papers and publish it. So what happens is archaeologists like to find things, but they often don't find the time to publish things. And so we fall behind. There's a very famous archaeologist from Britain, Kathleen Kenyon, and her father was the keeper of the books and manuscripts at the British Library. And he wrote a work on the history of the Bible. And she had excavations in many places, but Jericho is an interesting example. Her work at Jericho was very thorough, but it wasn't published. So there's not access to it. So people will say, well, Jericho, the walls didn't fall down, or this or that. You know, the excavation reports haven't even been published. So this happens. That's not a fault on her. It's a natural thing that happens. And I just want to say to you that's an issue to take into consideration. So I'm not going to talk a lot about archaeological sites. I'll just point out some of the more famous ones, and then some that you don't know about probably that I think are really interesting and you should know about. But let me start with this. Archaeology really got its birth from a guy named Heinrich Schliemann. And Schliemann really had a passion for the Iliad. But in the 19th century, German scholars had taken, you probably know this, the Bible, and had reduced it to mythology. But they did the same thing with classical works. They took classical works, they said they're not historical, they don't have value. And so he wondered, what if there's archaeology done on these things? What if they can be proven? He had no background, he was a businessman. He went to the well-known site where Troy was. He got a bunch of workers. So on the right, there's back on the last one, on the right, there's a papyrus fragment of Homer's Iliad, chapter 2, that I identified for publication a few years ago. And there's Heinrich Schliemann. Next slide. So he and his men worked, and they worked into the hill called a tell, and he was so passionate to want to prove that this is where, you know, the Mycenaeans came and fought against the Trojans, and we have Achilles and Hector, and we've got, you know, Helen of Troy and Paris and all that stuff. He dug a giant trench into the hill. You take this stuff, you dump it into a pile. He had no idea what he had done. And he found beautiful gold necklace and headdress and things. But apart from that, didn't really understand because he didn't have the scientific ability. So he leaves there. So nothing's proven. This is 1880s. In the 1920s, a professor from the University of Cincinnati went back, Carl Blagan, and he excavated Schliemann's dump pile. So he went where everything was thrown out from the big trench, and he said, I'm going to excavate that. And he went down in reverse order through it, and he proved definitively that Troy was destroyed in a battle like that described in the Iliad, well, in later Greek works, but teed up in the Iliad. And it would date to around the date of 1170 BC. So that means it places it at the time of the judges. So really, truly understand, at the time of the judges, Troy is falling to the Mycenaeans, and these things are really happening. And it's archaeology that was able to establish that. Well, at the same time, there are people interested in the Bible. And so if we go to the next, that's Schliemann doing more stuff. Go to the next one. Okay, so we go to the Bible, and I'm going to point out quickly a couple sites that you may know have been excavated. In the 1930s, Sir Leonard Woolley, with a whole team of British archaeologists, including the husband of Agatha Christie. Have you heard of that? He was an archaeologist. And so a lot of her stories, she hated Woolley's wife. And so death in Mesopotamia or death in Ur is about his wife, the director of the excavation's wife, being murdered. So very, very interesting. So he excavates the city of Ur. Abraham's city absolutely was discovered. We know that it was very sophisticated. We know they had multi-leveled houses. We know that inside the walls they put herbs and things to keep it smelling nice. They had plumbing that ran things out of the house into a septic. It was really a nice situation. And that really puts in context Abraham leaving it all. He left all these wonderful things behind. And we learn this from the archaeology that tells that story. What you're looking at in the background is called a ziggurat, and it was the focal point of the worship in Mesopotamia. So it was kind of a tiered temple of sorts. Okay, next one. All right. A city in Judea called Lachish, that's mentioned in the Bible, was destroyed by Sennacherib and his general Sargon II, who was mentioned by Boaz. The Assyrians decorated one of their palaces with scenes of the destruction of Lachish. And we can get a visual of what it looked like and what's being described in the Bible. You can see the city burning, and you can see women and children, women and children going off with their conquerors, and they'll be divvied up between the soldiers. And the process he was talking about is called miscegenation, where the conquerors have relations with the conquered, and then the children, they love both mother and father. And so it was their cruel way of controlling. It was a form of rape to control a culture. But with Lachish, we have pictures of it from the wall. And if you want to see them, I'm sure they're online, but they're on display at the British Museum. So a wonderful archaeological evidence. Next. Recently, the palace of King David was found in the city of David, Jerusalem. The archaeologist was asked, "How did you find this?" And she said, "Well, I took the Bible and I just excavated where the Bible seemed to indicate it was, and I found it." There's a tension in archaeology, especially amongst Israeli archaeologists, between people called minimalists and people called maximalists. And the minimalists want no connection with the Bible and want a pure way to go. The maximalists see that there is this overlap and all, which could be problematic if it's done with blinders. Of course, with those minimalists, they don't believe that the Israelites conquered Canaan. Because if they did, they weren't the first and rightful owners of the land. So they actually have their own political narrative that has to fit their archaeology. These are just really fascinating things. Next. All right, this is interesting. I won't go into great detail on it, but a temple in Egypt was discovered, dating just after David's time, and it talks about Egyptian conquest in Canaan. And in it, it lists 187 cities. And a lot of those cities are mentioned in the Bible. So we've got an Egyptian source mentioning cities, and they're in the Bible, and then some of them are mentioned as being fortified, which means they had a wall around it. And in the Bible, it says also they were fortified. So this is wonderful, interesting evidence from archaeology. Next. Well-known, ancient Corinth. Many of you may have been there before. It's been excavated. It's still being excavated. And there are all kinds of things, including something I'll show you a little bit later, that come from there that help to confirm our confidence. Next. Ephesus as well, a massive archaeological site. There's the theater where they were shouting down the Christians. Okay, next. Here's one that I want you to know. You may know it already, but there's a city, an archaeological site called Tel El Dabah. It was excavated by an Austrian whose name is Manfred Bietak. He excavated this for over 20 years. And what he established is that this site in Egypt was ancient Goshen. He found Hebrew burials. They're absolutely confirmed. And he also believes that he found the tomb of Joseph. Now this is a high-powered archaeologist. He found the statue that you see on your right. It's a statue with a hairdo. The hairstyle is Hebrew. He's wearing a multicolored garment, which is Hebrew. But he's holding across his shoulders symbols of Egyptian dignity and power. So we have to say, what does this date to? It dates to the Middle Kingdom. So who in the Middle Kingdom who's a Hebrew could possibly fit this status? And so does it have his name on it? No. But these are the kinds of things that we are privileged to work with. Next. Okay. Elisha's village was Tel Rehob. It's been excavated just recently. And they found a house, and in that house was a lot of pottery. And on the bottom of one cup, base of a cup, the name is written Elisha. And it's not a common name. It's a very uncommon name. See, we can now go to lists of names, and we can say, how common is this name, or how common is it at this time? And we can establish that this is, what's the likelihood that this is not the Elisha from the Bible? So Elisha's home, there on the left. Isn't that amazing? These people really lived, and we've got evidence for them. I mean, in the exhibit, the little seal of Isaiah, belonging to Isaiah the prophet, with his thumbprint on it. Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe, 2 of his seals have been found. One of them with his thumbprint on it. This is wonderful stuff. It doesn't have to be a big city. It can be a little tiny thing that cries out. But, next. Okay, so we have inscriptions now. These are carvings in rock. Next. So this might be of interest to you. In Jordan, this is a painting on plaster, was found, which says Balaam, the son of Beor, the divine seer. It's mentioning our Balaam from the Old Testament and New Testament. He's mentioned in Jordan on a wall. It's a verification that he was a real person that really lived. I've constructed, with the help of others, lists of names that are in the Bible, chronological by geographical area, where they're found in the Bible, and where they're confirmed through archaeological evidence. And right now, the list is at 136 names. That's amazing. Speaking of names, you know how difficult it would be for me to write your name? All right? And I would have a problem doing that. And imagine if we're using different scripts. So I'm a Hebrew scribe, and I'm writing the name of Assyrian kings, Ashurbanipal, or I abbreviate Pul, but Ashurbanipal, and I've got to write it in Hebrew. So I've got to do a transcription. Now, those later archaeologists find those names and inscriptions and can go back to see how they're spelled. And they're spelled with absolute consistency. And not only that, they're copied with absolute consistency. If you wanted me to guess on something they would mess up on with the copying, it would be names and things like that, because it'd be so difficult. But they did it with complete integrity. Next. Oh, this is called the Tel Dan inscription, discovered in the 90s, but a reference to the House of David. Next. And the House of David is mentioned on other inscriptions as well. This had been destroyed by the Bedouins, but it's called the Mesha Stela, the Moabite stone. It talks about Ahab and the Moabites and some things like that are confirmed. Next. This is called the Black Obelisk. It's at the British Museum. And if you want to see an image of a Israelite king, there he is, Jehu, bowing down before an Assyrian leader, giving him tribute. So just what I told you about. Next. This is a lengthy Hebrew inscription that was found in Hezekiah's tunnel. An amazing engineering feat. But inscription dedicated the feat, and it was to get water while the Assyrians were coming in, because they poisoned the water well. And this is in Istanbul, now Turkey, but is an important early writing in Hebrew. Next. Here's one from the Christian era. It's a bone box in the first century. A popular style of Jewish burial was to lay a body out, let the skin disintegrate, clean it with herbs and things like that, take the bones apart and put them in an ossuary. Jesus was destined for that, had it not been for the power of the resurrection. So that's what they were intending to do. This one is one that would have been used by a family, and the name that's on the side of it is Caiaphas, all right, the high priest. So he would have been buried in that. So this is good stuff. It's just small pieces of evidence, but wonderful. Next. A very important piece of evidence, because people had said that Pontius Pilate, there's no evidence for him, although there's a lot of literary evidence for him. But this inscription was found, and you can see maybe across the middle, you see the S in the middle and the U next to it. That's Pilatus, that's his name. And down below that is an I, a U, a D, and an A, Judah. And it says Pilate, the governor of Judea. All right, so very interesting. Next. Another wonderful inscription. This is one of the most important inscriptions in the New Testament. In the middle, and I'm sorry I don't have a laser pointer, but in the middle, it says Gallio. Gallio was the governor that Paul stood before in Corinth at the Bema seat. This gives us a date for Gallio's reign as governor of Achaia. And why is it important in the New Testament? Because it provides the only sure date that we have in the New Testament from a secular source. And all the dates from the New Testament then are based on this date, because we know that he met Paul in Corinth at this time. All right, next. This is at Corinth. Paul greets several times a person of great wealth in Corinth named Erastus. And he was the head of public works. The way they did public works there, if you had a lot of money, they made you the head of public works, and you paid for public works. And so one of the things that he had to do was resurface the theater. And down in the pavement near the theater, he has his name and his occupation. The very person that Paul's writing to. When people go to Corinth, it's not your fault, but people just walk right by this stuff. They don't even know it exists. So sadly, up until a few years ago, it wasn't even had a boundary around it. You could just walk all over it. So if you go there, go down to the theater. It's down there. You'll see it. Next. All right, seals we talked about in the exhibit. That's the seal of Hezekiah. They're seals of just regular people. They're seals of kings. So you can't say these are all just of kings or forgeries. There are all kinds of people that we have seals of. Non-Hebrew people, Hebrew people, and so forth. In the New Testament, Old Testament and New Testament, where it talks about being sealed by the Spirit, that's what it means. It means allowing the Holy Spirit to put his name on our heart, to put his impression on us. Next. Okay, that's Boaz. Baruch, I'm sorry, with the thumbprint up on the left. Next. That's the Isaiah one that you've seen. That's the true size of it there. It's just a tiny thing. Next. Okay. Oh, my time's up? Well, we didn't get through it. Let me just summarize by saying there are a lot of writings that survive. And I wish I had opportunity to show you different kinds of writings and all. But we got through the archaeological stuff. That's fine. But we have a dearth of information on papyri, on cuneiform tablets, and all these things inform our understanding of the Bible and give us complete confidence in it. So that's why I have joy to do the stuff I do. And I hope even with the few things that we covered today, you'll walk out with a new step in your stride, with confidence in God's word, that it's historically reliable. It can be trusted. God bless.
Thank you, Professor Caroll. It's like the book of Acts. God's work is not over. So today's talk, even though ended in the middle, is an indication that God's work is continuing and we have to catch up. So a few years back, we visited Palestine. There, our tour guide, who is an Arab, who said that Bible will help you understand history, and history will help you understand the Bible better. So today's two distinguished lectures have highlighted that part and taught us a lot. If you happen to be my age, you feel you regret that you have chosen wrong subjects in your college and school. But if you happen to be young, please take inspiration from both of them. Now, the floor is open for Q&A. Are there any hand mics going around? Yeah, okay. No, sir, please. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, keep it.
Come down.
No, I will give the mic to them as I'm going to question comes. Okay. May I request you to briefly introduce yourself and just ask the question without any comment.
First of all, good evening, sir. My name is Joyson Paul, and I'm an assistant professor in K.R. Mangalwini University. But of course, not from this subject, but from medicine. So my question is, some of the archaeologists believe, and I think they have excavated about the son of Jesus, Judea, and they say that we have found some tomb or something about the son of Jesus. And as a Christian, we do not believe that. What Bible says that there is no son of Jesus. So what do you want to say about it?
Yeah, well, there's no evidence for Jesus having a son. Yes. A papyrus was discovered 10 years ago, and a professor at Harvard worked it out so Harvard would buy it for her to work on. She was, and it was in Coptic, which is a later language, but an important one. And right in the middle of it, it talks about Jesus' wife. But this is cut rectangularly perfectly. It's lined up, Jesus' wife, like right in the middle with lights blinking. And it was a forgery. And for those who saw it, who work in this area, it was very clear that it was. So these kinds of things, there's no historical evidence for them. And we have so much evidence for so many other things. So don't worry about it.
Hello, I'm Deborah. There are a lot of archaeological work that's going on. And one that I came across was Ron White's Noah's Ark. And then there's a lot of other Ron White's work, especially the Mount Sinai. And so what's your take on his work?
First you consider me a friend. You do? So I'm going to be honest with this. Ron White lived some time ago, and he was very enthusiastic about things. But he came up with a lot of ideas that later scholars have shown are not true. One example, if you've ever heard that in the Red Sea, there's a path that they walked on, and then along it are chariot wheels and all. So a friend of mine, an Egyptologist, Jim Hoffmeyer, sent scuba divers down, and you won't believe the miracle that had happened. Those chariot wheels were transformed into the steering wheels of Jeeps. So they were thrown in one of the wars there, and they were just piled in there. You would have so much incrustation from coral and things like that, corrosion. So that's not. And as he has, video showing these things, if it sounds too good to be true, it's probably not, But Elisha is. But and then the site of Mount Sinai, the earliest tradition is on the Sinai Peninsula, and that's where Constantine and his wife, his mother, Helen, dedicated the church and a monastery there. So I say, well, that's the earliest tradition. That's good for me. It's not going to have, they say that in Arabia, they have, things that you see and stuff, and that people have been kept from seeing it and suppressed, and there's always this kind of conspiracy around it. I think there's much better evidence than something like that. So I'm sorry, I hope that doesn't hurt you.
Anyone else?
There's a question.
Hello, good evening. To be, I don't know if anyone else doesn't have a question. I have 3 questions, but I'll start off with the first one. I'm sorry, yeah. My name is Nitish. I'm working as a data analyst. I come from a Hindu family. I'm also a chapter director of Reasonable Faith, Delhi. And that's my introduction. So the question that I have is, the first one is on the Shroud of Turin. Dr. Gary Habermas says that he's almost 90% sure that it is actually Jesus' shroud. We have different schools of theology, different churches who have different depictions of Jesus. Some say he didn't have long hair, some say he did have. My question to you is, what is being a historian, being an archaeologist, what do you think is actually the picture with the Shroud of Turin? And is it actually, if not Jesus, is it something supernatural?
Right. Well, it's been radiocarbon dated, I think to the 13th century, 14th century. But people say it was in a fire and it was exposed, it destabilized it, and because of that, the radiocarbon dating is off. By the way, if you think radiocarbon dating is not useful or not right, it really is. If done in a very scientific methodology at a great laboratory and done carefully. Now, when it goes way back, I can't answer that. But in the historical period, we use it and it's useful. I would say the shroud has been radiocarbon dated. However, there's been a recent analysis of it that was done that did some other form of dating. And I can't explain it, I'm sorry. But I read about it recently. And it indicated from that perspective that it was first century. So I think at best you can say, I wish it were true, but I don't know. And I think that's fair. I had, at the early part of my PhD, I was very, very interested in it. But, it has problems with it. I don't know how it would be done if it was done. I don't know any of that. But it is a very fascinating item. We, on our exhibit, when we have our large exhibit, we have 150 items. And in the New Testament area, sometimes we put a facsimile of the Shroud of Turin. And we contrast that with the New Testament textual data. So with the textual data, and we have a manuscript open to the resurrection, and you've got that, we have so much great data that gives us confidence that this other might get in the way. But
The young people in this room, to the extent possible, please connect your questions with today's excellent lectures. If we go hypotheticals, the next question can be from Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. So before you think of a question, let me ask Brother Rajkumar. Brother, you mentioned that, I got the impression that you have Israelites and most non-Israelites are Aryans. That's the feeling I got. How do you see the framework like Semites and anti-Semites?
The fate of
The framework of Semites and anti-Semites. So all those who are not Semites happen to be Aryans.
Yes, there were the Semitic people. There were also, if I understand your question correctly, forgive me if I don't. There were the Aryans, and there's various kinds of Aryans that moved into those areas. And then there were the Semitic people, and then there were those people who were a mixture of the ancient Aryans and the Semitic people that lived in that area. And you find derogatory terms mentioned for those people who are the mixed group, as well as the Semitic group of people. There is a sense in which the Semitic people are treated quite positively in the Bible. So for example, you have, the Balaam narrative there. You have in the book of Proverbs, there's a king mentioned there who tells her son, gives him Proverbs, talks about, the woman is an Eshet Chayil, which in our translation is translated as an excellent wife who can find. And, everyone will say, well, this is what you should find in a woman. Oh man, but that's not what it is. It's a poetry that is told in Semitic form, and it's describing a woman who is physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually strong person. It's a Semitic poetry, and it's the poetry of a non-Jewish Semitic king and his mother. So you have those kinds of positive portrayals of non-Jewish people in the Bible. And when you see that, you say, yes, you see in the Jewish prophets a kind of a sisterhood with other Semitic people. At the same time, there's always a sense in which the Bible is saying, no, don't be like the ancient Aryans. You will pretty much head down the wrong path if you do that.
Are these ancient Aryans descendants of Adam?
Our ancient Aryans, yes, everyone is a descendant of the primeval human beings.
So, sir, when Adam was created, how many Adams were created? Only one, or?
This is again a question that's kind of going beyond our topic here, but I'll be happy to answer your question. The word Adam is a generic term, and it means human being. There is a couple there who are the paradigmatic human beings. It's one couple, historically, Adam and Eve, but at the same time, the Bible, in its very Semitic way, gives us to believe that God created other human beings as well. So there is then Cain, who is the son of Adam and Eve, and they go and find wives. Well, where did they come from? Because God created all human beings in His image. In the image of God, He created them. Male and female, He created them. And the paradigmatic, primeval human beings are Adam and Eve. Is that okay?
I'm Randall Livingston, and
Randall Livingston.
Yeah, good to see you, Boaz. I have a question for you, and why is it taking so long to find the seals of Mohenjo-daro? Why can't we figure that out? What's holding it back?
please come and do a PhD at. I think it's hard work. I think, you know, sometimes it's hard work, and you can talk more about this, Scott. I mean, we both have done PhDs. There's a number of people here who have done PhDs, who have done. You just work hard, you work hard, you work hard. For months together, you work hard, and you say, I'm not making any progress, but suddenly something happens, and the light gets turned on. I think we have not worked hard enough because we don't want to. I have no idea. I wish there would be more people who will say, I want to do what that guy did to climb up that
Henry Rawlinson.
Yes, to climb up that very dangerous place because the quest is there. I want to do this, and I'll do this at any cost because something is there that I have to discover. I think that fire is not there.
You know, to add to that, it is very tedious. It takes a lot. I work with manuscripts when I'm back in my offices, and to work with them and prepare them for publication, it's a lot of hard work with different languages. My mentor, my main doctoral mentor, he would say to me, just publish it. Don't wait until it's perfect, and let other people work on it ahead of you, after you. And then you build collaboratively, and nobody will hold you accountable for being wrong if you just get it out there. But if you're holding on to it, people will get upset that it's not being done. So I don't know much about the timing of things with that, but maybe that's an approach.
And if I can kind of follow up on that, you know, my PhD work is in 2 Dead Sea Scroll texts. The only reason I was able to do that is because till that time, there were 5 French scholars who were holding all the scrolls under their control. And the only way you could study the scrolls is to study under them. Well, these are old guys, you know, and so for years together, it came to a standstill. Work wasn't being done and published on the Dead Sea Scrolls until 2 court cases were brought. One in California, another one in Jerusalem, and both of those court cases, the ruling was, this is not your property, Frenchmen. Please let others do research work. And research work bloomed after that.
Yeah.
So I think things like that need to happen for research work like that of Indus Valley scripts.
Dr. Scott, there is a question here. You said that Israel and Syria were the least excavated. What were the reasons behind it? And you are supposed to talk regarding languages also. Inscription you told, I guess they were in Hebrew, I think. Which languages were prevailing there, and you talk something about the languages.
Okay, I'm not catching everything you're saying, but and you're breaking up a little bit. But tell me again, and others listen and help me understand what he's saying, so I can answer you.
The first question is excavation. You said Israel and Syria were the least excavated, archaeological. They were excavation least done there. What was the reason behind it?
Okay.
What were the reasons? Why they were not allowed there?
Okay, hang on, and I'll answer you. What did someone pick that up? One. What wasn't excavated? In Egypt. Yeah, okay, I can answer that. Thank you. That's a good question. And it's one that you might think, how is that possible? Well, it's very complicated to get approval for an excavation. It's a long process. You have to work through the government. The Egyptians are lovely people, but the way they run things is very chaotic. And so things can take a long time to just get approved. They're costly. It costs a lot to work there. You know, I would say those are the main things. I think there's a decline just in archaeologists. With evangelicals, all right, Protestants, I only know one who's an Egyptologist, and that's Jim Hopmeyer. There are no others. There may be, and I'm missing, but they don't even study in that area. They're studying important in other areas, but we don't have people even working in that area. And so I think that with the economy and with different interests in education, I think these things are just going to go down, 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 sadly. I fly over and flying in to land in Cairo, and you can see one excavation site after another. Our site, when we went to, it was taken over by Harvard University. They finally published a portion of it. The site would have taken, it was a kilometer and a half square, filled with buildings. It would have taken a lifetime to do it. And so those are challenges too. You know, you have to know when you say, I'm not going to do it anymore. It's very hard. I hope that answers that. What are the languages to work in Egypt?
Hello.
That were used in those periods that I talked about recently? Well, I mean, there are the cuneiform languages, so Sumerian and Akkadian and Babylonian and a form of Assyrian, and there's Hebrew and there's Aramaic. Akkadian was the international language in Abraham's time. Aramaic was the international language in Daniel's time. And then the next international language would be Greek. And then the next international language after that would be Latin. And so those are the major, like, ancient languages. And then you have others that fill in. For me, our mentor made us take a new language a semester. And because he has 31 languages. And note to self. So, but now I just work in a handful of them because I work in the ones that are most important and meaningful for my personal faith quest. But those are the main languages. And he mentioned many more.
Good evening. I'm Supriya Sarkar. Boaz, I don't know, Pastor Boaz, if you remember me from DBF days.
I do.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, both of you and both the speakers, for the snapshot you just gave. And it has created an appetite in me. I had never known these areas. So my question is, these are the facts that are very important for us, for a person like me who comes from a different faith, and also for a country like ours, which is going through a very difficult time, to understand and to justify the evidence, the proof, and the authenticity and the originality of this. So is there a way one can get more information, or do you conduct any online courses, or do you have a way to reach to people like me who's more like seeker, information seeker at this stage, to justify my faith and to support it wherever I go? Thank you. That's my question.
Well, you can, take over from here also, Scott. First of all, it's so nice to see you, Supriya. So nice to see you. So nice to see so many of you. Some of you have known me like a little kid, Some of you have known me as a pastor at Delhi Bible Fellowship and different parts of my life. So it's so good to be here. I think one of the hardest things, and this concerns both of us, is that just like there are so few archaeologists, it's also true that those few archaeologists and scholars in our areas of expertise, when they publish books, it is so expensive. It's $150. How can someone in America afford $150 book. What about India? So the question that is before, before us is, and I have made it a point in my life to make sure that whenever at least I publish something, I tell my publishers that you have to publish this same book in India at an Indian cost. Let an Indian publisher publish it. I think there's a need for that. I think we should take advantage of internet. We should take advantage of webinars and open it up to our Indian brothers and sisters so that the latest thinking in all of these areas can be made available to just regular people in India and these parts of the world.
Yeah, good. I would say the internet can be your best friend or your worst enemy. There are some wonderful resources on it. There's some terrible resources. There are some very good things that summarize important archaeological discoveries as it relates to the Bible. It's like with any research, who are researchers in here, if our thesis is too broad, it just dilutes what we're doing, it spreads it out, it's hard to do. So you really have to be focused about what you're looking for and get yourself to or some trusted sites. And I would say you could find in specific areas good information, current information that can help you. If you have time after, take my email, and I myself or someone on our staff will point you to some good things. You're welcome. I like seekers of faith.
My name is Sharmila Banerjee Livingston. Boaz, it's good to see you. And I was thinking of Professor Jim Hoffmeyer while you mentioned him. And he is a dear friend, and he was a professor when I was at Wheaton. And so a great connection. I think of him still as an Egyptologist and one of the few in the world. My question is, as a believer, I look at scripture and I believe. And as you said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. But even with what you showed us today, and you mentioned even items that related to King David, from a secular point of view, what would be the contention? Because I've read, I mean, they don't even think of David even existing in history. That shocked me when I actually read that, because I just think of David as a real character, real through history. But with what you've shown us today, what would be the contention?
Right. Well, I think philosophically, and by the way, great to have a Wheaton graduate here and someone that's studied under Jim. He's a quality guy. So I can only put myself in their shoes to try to understand, and I would go back to that minimalist position, and they just reduce, there is no historical reliability or connection, and if you're making that, they'll say that you're driven by a blind faith that's hoping to prove the Bible to be true. But when you have inscriptions, and these names show up in inscriptions, either they question the readings of them. With the Tel Dan, they can't do that. And House of David shows up in some other places, so it's not just in one place. I think it's just sometimes Christians can have a blind agenda, and sometimes those who are not Christians have blind agendas. And when you're dealing with someone like that, it's very complicated to get them to see the truth, but remain unmovable. If there's good scholarship around it, these are wonderful things. And I look at this evidence and the stuff I work with, I really, truly look at these things that God preserved them for me and for us to have a stronger relationship with him. I think their evidence is preserved by him. And so that's something that wouldn't be a category for them, but it should be for us. That probably doesn't answer at all, but it's a try.
Good evening, Dr. Scott, Dr. Watts. Thank you very much for your hard work and efforts you have taken in collecting all these artifacts. I have 3 questions, but I would like to have small answers so it won't take time. First of all, as you have refuted the claim of Shroud of Turin on the basis of radiocarbon dating and other scientific instruments and studies, the question comes, like according to Bible, when we study and we presume that the earth life is maybe thousands of years, not in millions or billions of years. And radiocarbon dating proves that it is billions of years, the rocks and the other things which we find. So how you bring it to one standard portal? By using the same technology.
Right. I'm admittedly inconsistent, but that doesn't bother me. So I'm sorry. I don't know the science behind how those things happen on the extremities. But I do know when I send it to laboratories and we have things done, and sometimes it means sending, you should know this, when something's radiocarbon dated, and it might be at an auction site and they say it's radiocarbon dated to this date, they may have sent it to 2 or 3 laboratories and they take the best date. So these things are not, they're not hard science even in and of themselves, but so I can't answer that.
So it means we can use science and technology where it supports the Bible and the Bible facts, rest we can just say.
Yeah, I wouldn't, those things are great for us to use.
Okay.
I didn't get to the areas in my area, but there are all kinds of technological things that we do that are cutting edge, that are, whether it's using AI or it's looking in and unraveling things, with computer technology, or it's reading multi-layers of things using multispectral imaging. Those things are all great benefits. But
thank you. The second question is, I understand you are not doing archaeology yourself, but you are studying what is already found, what is already in the, in the possession of some museum or something. One artifact which these Ethiopians claim to have is the Ark of the Covenant. It's very much in media and everything. Have you ever desired to go and visit and find out the truth about it? Because it's the most sought after artifact. What you would say about it?
Well, first, I wouldn't say that it's the most sought after for me. And I'll say secondly, it was only 3 weeks ago that I saw the first Indiana Jones movie. So I haven't gotten to the others yet. So don't ruin them for me, all right? I do know a lot of people say that it was taken by Jeremiah to Ethiopia. I would say that that's make-believe, because Ethiopia as a country didn't exist at that time. Ethiopia meant in Greek, dark. It meant technically sunburnt face. It meant someone that was dark. And so it was an
I think it was Kish. Kish.
All right.
It was known as Kish at that time. My third question would be, I recently been to Egypt and I saw like...
So may I say a little bit about that?
So the third one is, as we see in the Old Testament... Okay. All right, sorry. Okay.
So I want to say a little bit about that because I've taught in Ethiopia. I've gone to that area, and believe me, the ark is not there.
Small question. In the Old Testament, we read King of Valley of Kings, where all the kings were buried. So in Egypt, we find Tutankhamun, other tombs, and these were found. And what about Israel? It's written in the Bible as the sir, you said that there are certain archaeologists who said that I read in Bible and I went there and I found it. So why Israeli government or other organization are not making an effort to find the King of Valleys? Where is the body of King David and King Solomon? They were all buried in the Valley of Kings. So any investigation having in this direction is happening?
You want to try it?
Thank you. My name is Anil Pundir, by the way.
Go ahead.
I didn't get it.
And neither I did. It was. Can you? Well, I don't want you to restate the. Can you give a small question in that?
Hello, Rain from St. Stephen's College. I'm pursuing my physics there, first year. First of all, wonderful lectures. They were really engaging. My question is kind of simple and short. So how often does your scientific pursuit, the pursuits that you're, the endeavors that you're carrying on, how often do they tend to have contradictory statements or contradictory evidences or, results when taken gospel or the scriptures as a matter of, reference? So how often does that contradictory popping up, and how do you go about it? Like, what do you guys do post the contradictory state? Thank you.
Well, I teach at a university where there is both the science and there's humanities and there's theology and there's the study of the Bible. And one of the things that we have come to realize is that it's the constant quest for the truth. And the science scholars at our university are quite convinced that that truth goes together with the biblical truth. And the quest is there to get to that truth. Even though it seems like on the surface it may seem contradictory, but keep searching, keep searching, keep searching. And when you come to the goal of it, after a lot of search, you will see that it'll lead you to that truth. And most scientists that I know who have become profound Christians have become profound Christians as a result of that quest, that constant quest. And then they came to the realization, yes, this is in keeping with the biblical truth that I find here is in keeping with the truth that I've found in the study of sciences.
Scott?
Nothing, that's wonderful. I don't have anything to add. If the contradictions you're talking about are passages, where one passage says one thing and another says something else, it might be a contradiction between scripture and science, but you might be thinking about contradiction within the Bible. There's an excellent book that addresses that, written by someone named Walt Kaiser. Do you remember the title of it? Might be Hard Sayings in the Bible, right?
And also Chris Wright.
Okay, good.
Chris Wright and Walter Kaiser.
From the engaging with academia, I would like to assure you what we are going to do is we are going to coordinate with both our scholars and create a list of those important books or web sources and share with all of you. We have all of your addresses.
Thank you both for the wonderful lectures. I'm Tomin, an associate pastor at GCLC. Is it okay, Dr. Boaz, if I ask something related to the Dead Sea Scrolls, because you said that you did your...
most certainly, yes.
So...
And Dr. Scott Caroll also can
but
answer it.
I apologize because it's totally out of topic, but because you said about Dead Sea Scrolls and we were talking about it there as well, E.P. Sanders came up with the term covenantal normism, with regards to the new perspective of Paul and all that. And a lot of the evidence was based on the Dead Sea Scrolls. They said that the Essenes, they did not believe in works righteousness, but Jewish faith was covenantal normism, basically. So what is your take on that? If you have read those documents, do you support that case, or are you not in favor of that?
Well, that is a complex question. It seems to me, and Scott, you can take over as well. I think the material that is there in the Dead Sea Scrolls gives us a very, very good picture overall about what is the context of the thought of the Gospels and the thought of the New Testament, because it talks about the nature of Jewish thought at that time among that group of people as against the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Judeans and a whole plethora of groups of people. And it seems to me that, there were those people who were very profound thinkers in the Dead Sea Scroll community who saw Jesus and heard his teachings and saw him doing healings and saw him gather this new community, and those are the ones who followed Jesus. And that is the understanding that one should get in Pauline thought as well. It's only by understanding those kinds of texts that we can truly understand what Paul was saying, and perhaps say that maybe Luther misunderstood what Paul was saying, and that's okay. That's okay for us to question that, but that's what research work is all about, to truly get to understand what those people were saying, and how does it help me understand what Jesus was saying and what Pauline scriptures, Pauline epistles were saying. So that would be my overall take on your question.
Yeah, so that's a great answer. It's always complicated when you have a body of writing, and then you have another group, and you're comparing this writing with that group. You have to be really careful. And while the Dead Sea Scrolls provide essential and important background information to the New Testament, you have to keep in mind that these men lived in isolation. They rejected Jerusalem and the temple, and they were extremists. While they talk about the Pharisees, unlike Jesus, who believed the Pharisees were too strict, they believed they were too liberal. So there are a lot of differences. And I'm not saying that there aren't places where they overlap, but I would say to be careful how you build those bridges, because you might think that there's too much going on there.
I'm sure you all will agree with me that today we have had an excellent and stimulating both scholarly and spiritual banquet. Please join me in thanking brothers Rajkumar and Scott. And may I request Pastor Isaac to come and say a few words and pronounce the benediction.
Thank you, Sham, and we are very grateful for all of you to stay back till late 9, and I know a lot of us have to go back to church in the morning, but grateful thanks. Sham kept talking about engaging the academia is one of the departments of the church over here, and the whole issue is to have discussions and forums and seminars and exhibits like this. So Bible Bhavan Christian Fellowship organized this for and concluded like this. Professor Boaz Johnson every day was giving lectures along with the displays, and they were also very, very stimulating. And we are planning to get the exhibition back next year in much more bigger way than it is today. We tested the water, and it seems it's good. Thank you so much. BBCF, Bible Bhavan Christian Fellowship, is a church that meets here in about 125 locations all over North India, with our 12 training centers, which we call Anugrah Ashrams, in 12 cities of North India. It is wonderful to be doing exactly what we are doing here in all those locations right across. We don't blow our trumpets, we don't print about this, we silently are foot soldiers of Jesus who are silently working in the quiet frontiers and not so welcoming frontiers of North India. But it's a great joy for us to have you here. And let me, without praying, just pronounce the benediction, and could ask you kindly to be upstanding for the benediction. Unto him who is able to keep you from falling and to present you faultless before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy, to the only wise God our Savior, we give glory, majesty, dominion, and power, now and forevermore. Amen. The Lord go with you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yes, that's why I was going to that actually. That was a political stuff. Yeah, and we need to understand that that's what the Bible was engaging in. No other religion